welcome back to this morning's concurrent workshop with Prosple. This is the Prosple workshop. I'm going to hand over now to our presenters, Jeff and Richard from Prosple. They're going to talk to us about graduate recruitment in a post-COVID world. So let's hand over to Jeff and Richard now.
Thanks, Ben, and hello, everyone. My name's Jeff Duncan, and we've got Richard McKeown on the call with us. And as Ben said, we're going to do share our vision of the future of graduate recruitment. Hopefully, being day 2 of the conference, you've had a chance to meet Jeff Adams and Jeremy and Sam and Jordan and the crew at our booth and learn a bit about Prosple. But for those of you who don't or aren't familiar with Prosple, we're a careers and education technology company. We're best known for one particular website called Grad Australia, which you can see on my screen here. But Grad Australia is one of about, I think, 150 different sites now in our portfolio, ranging from university partners like UWA, you can see here on my screen, through to membership bodies like Engineers Australia, through to even student societies that use our careers and education technology. And so we're the team behind that. And Richard and I are both co-founders of that business. And I guess, one of the jobs that Richard and I have as founders of an ed tech startup is to do our best to peer into the future and try and anticipate what's coming next, so that we can, be at the forefront of any changes and revolutions and make the most of changes that are on the horizon. So today we thought it'd be a fantastic opportunity to share our version of what we think is on the horizon, and hopefully I'll have some time at the end of it for some interesting questions and Q&A to interrogate some of the ideas that we're going to put forward. So to kick things off, our hypothesis looks something like this. We think that in some time in the future, and we're not going to go as far as putting an exact time frame. It might be 1 year, it might be 10 years plus, but at some point in the future, we're going to see employers, graduate recruiters like the sort that are no doubt on this call, no longer looking exclusively to what we call big degrees for graduate recruitment. And in this presentation, we're going to make the distinction between big degrees, of the traditional format. So let's say 3 to 5 years, typically on campus, and $50,000 plus investment. And the second category in dot point 2 being smaller stackable micro-credentials. And our hypothesis is that these smaller stackable micro-credentials are going to play a much, much bigger role in the education marketplace. One of the implications of that, and speaking to this third dot point, is that the marketplace for education will become much more fragmented. And a growing share of the education marketplace will go to, this smaller micro-credential education providers. And we think that what we'll start to see is really highly, highly specialized providers that just live and breathe one particular thing. And we'll share some examples of that in the upcoming slides. Another trend we expect to see is large employers playing a increasingly hands-on role in this. And this may be in the form of, for example, partnering with education providers to work alongside these institutions to make sure that the right skills and training is part of that education marketplace, or indeed employers becoming educators themselves and dipping their toe in the education market and being absolutely hands-on in training for their future skills requirements. And Richard will share some examples of that. So that's kind of the high level in a couple of dot points. And so and actually nothing here is in and of itself too revolutionary or too controversial, but the interesting bit is to actually go to the next level and think, well, what does that actually mean for us as, professionals in the graduate recruitment industry? So just to explore that a bit, it's interesting to start with some of the challenges that we think are inherent with the traditional big degree qualification approach that dominates today's education market. The first point I've got here is one of relevance, and this is by no means a dig at the teaching quality that's part of a big degree education. It's more just a reflection of the fact that structurally it's very, very hard for a degree of the traditional format, so 3 to 5 years, to keep up with the constantly evolving skills requirements in the modern jobs market. We're in a world now where, so a degree, as I say, takes 3 to 5 years. In 3 to 5 years, entire industries can rise and fall in that time. And Richard and I were reflecting yesterday on a very practical example. We both studied engineering. In my case, it took me 6 years to complete that degree. And we both studied MATLAB and Fortran coding languages in the first year of our respective engineering degrees, which at the time, made sense because that was kind of the norm in industry. Fast forward 6 years, and it's quite unusual to find Fortran being used in sort of modern industry, except for legacy cases. And it's been replaced by entirely new languages like Python, for example. And so just to illustrate further, let's say I wanted to, upskill and use my qualifications to get a degree in the technology sector, and I wanted to learn Python exclusively. I could plausibly go back to university and get a 3-year computer science degree. That's one option, but it's quite possible that by the time I finish that degree, the industry's moved on again and a different coding language is in vogue. So this point about relevance is just a reflection of the fact that things are moving so quickly that it's difficult for large format education approaches to really be up to the minute in terms of what industry is looking for. And obviously, if they're not reflecting what industry is looking for, then they're not necessarily a good, reliable talent signal for recruiters. And equally, a degree, if I'm a student thinking about what qualification to pick, a degree is not a reliable or not a robust way for me as a student to signal to an employer that I have the skills they're looking for. And we think there's better ways to do that, and we'll talk about that in the next slide.
At the same time, Jeff, if I can just jump in, it goes the other way as well, because employers today, they need to signal to students what skills they demand. And at the moment, one of the best signals that a student has about that is what degrees they hire from. The other thing that Jeff and I have in common is that we both worked together at a strategy consulting firm for a number of years after university. And in our cases, we only figured that out towards the end of our degree. And we were in fact lucky that those firms liked hiring students from engineering backgrounds. But if I knew that, if a student knew that in high school and they wanted to go and work for a management consulting firm, they might end up studying engineering because they look and they see the hiring trends and they see that employers are hiring students from those degrees. And so it does work both ways. Students are trying to figure out, okay, what skills, what learning qualifications should I get to make myself attractive to employers? And employers signal that based on the students they do hire.
Spot on. And so to this point about accessibility, this is a really interesting one, and obviously really topical right now. The reality is that traditional big degrees in their current format, for a lot of people in society, are a real luxury and a privilege. And it's just, the first point is just a very practical one about, for a lot of people, moving to another city, taking 5 years off full-time work, being away from friends and family and support communities and all that sort of stuff. And, I can reflect on this firsthand, having grown up on a remote sheep station outback New South Wales. A lot of the, my friends from high school, who with the benefit of hindsight would have made incredible young professionals, naturally very smart, very talented, very hardworking. The prospect of, moving 1,000 kilometres away away from friends and family. You know, it's not like you've got friends that are going to uni as well. So that, you know, having to support yourself, it's a big, daunting move. It's not an easy one like it is for some segments of society. And you couple that with, I guess, social norms. And what I mean by that is, you know, let's say, you know, you studied commerce in year 10 and you quite enjoyed the accounting element. And so you think you might want to be an accountant. It's easy to take for granted that the types of people on this call more than likely grew up knowing someone who, you know, was an accountant, either in the family or family friend or whatever it might be. So you've got that point of reference, you've got that role model. But you reflect on this from the perspective of people from outside that sort of demographic who, you know, there's every chance they've literally never met an accountant or a banker or a management consultant. And so it's just not on the radar. And you know, therefore it's just not an obvious choice to them. And you couple that with the fact that, you know, the practical barriers of, you know, moving and all the rest. And it does mean that traditional degrees become a significant barrier. And what that means for employers is that for those of us that have a serious focus on diversity and inclusion hiring strategies, requiring a big degree does actually become, for a lot of disciplines, a big impediment to making serious progress. And the most obvious practical example of that is in Indigenous recruitment, where you just don't have enough Indigenous graduates coming through in, you know, particular fields to meet the demands of the employers on this call. So we'll speak more about the answers to that on the next slide, but there's no doubt that you know, traditional format degrees do represent a big barrier, and there can be better ways to do this. The third point is one that we don't tend to think about much as recruiters, but it is very real, and we do miss it, and that is credentials fraud. And there's a lot of good research out there that speaks to credentials fraud, education credentials in particular, being far more prevalent than we'd care to admit. The study I'm referring to here is 30 to 40% of CVs having discrepancies in education claims. And then in terms of employers actually validating those education claims, the majority of employers will ask for certificates, but only a fraction of those will actually go as far as checking their legitimacy. And so that's obviously an issue if we're talking about a really reliable, robust approach to education verification. And so in terms of the solutions or the way we see the industry evolving, we think that stackable micro-credentials can play a big part in addressing each of these three challenges in the industry. So to the point about relevance, typically the structure of a micro-credential is they're much shorter and they're to the point. They're focused on often a specific skill set that is relevant to what's required on a specific job. And so done well, you don't have such an obvious disconnect between the training and the real world skills required. And often, in fact, it will actually be the employers playing some kind of role in crafting these credentials. And Rich will talk about this in a sec, either issuing them themselves or working with education providers to make sure that what's being taught in the education market is actually reflecting what's needed and not 5 years behind. So they're constantly revolving in real time. It's a really dynamic marketplace, and that competition ensures that these credentials have to be up to the minute in terms of what the jobs marketplace is looking for. Otherwise, they're irrelevant. And we think that's a really healthy dynamic. It's good for the student and better for the employer. In terms of accessibility, we're no longer talking about having to go and spend 5 years in Sydney and drop $50,000 on a qualification and be away from friends and family. It might be the ask is, you need an internet connection for 3 hours a week. And indeed, if you spend the time to look into what's already out there, it's not a stretch to say that some of the absolute best training from people at the very cutting edge of their game in their respective industries is widely available, very short and to the point, free, and there's very few barriers to that sort of high quality training now. And we think that's really, really exciting for the prospects of diversity and inclusion hiring strategies. The second point here is that let's take Richard's example of someone wanting to do management consulting. If it's no longer the case that I need to go and do a 5-year engineering degree, and let's say there's a few key skills hidden, buried somewhere in that degree that management consultants are looking for. It might be analytical ability, problem solving, communication. I'm making this up, but it could be, we could very soon be in a world where an engineering degree is not the best proxy for those skill sets. And instead, I do a communications micro-credential, an analytical modeling micro-credential, and a problem-solving set of training, for example. And that might be all of, who knows, 2 weeks of training, but that is enough for me to demonstrate to an employer that I've got what it takes. And you can just see as chalk and cheese in terms of the barriers to demonstrating a particular skill set that's relevant to a job. We remove all the fluff around it and just get it down to its bare essentials and what really, really matters. And the third point is addressing credentials fraud. And this kind of speaking to the illustration we have on the left here. This isn't anything new that we're suggesting. This already exists today. There's already really well-established standards out there that allow educators, institutions to issue their credentials in the form of a badge or indeed on the blockchain. And you as an employer can, verify those credentials literally with one click. And in the case of open badges, within a particular credential, you've got a whole heap of metadata embedded within that about the course, about the issuer, and that's portable, stackable. I can display it on LinkedIn. I can put it on my CV, and particularly if it's done on the blockchain, it's basically mathematically impossible for me to manipulate unless the institution is in on it. And so it's really reliable. It's a lot more efficient. Employers can validate it with one click, and we think this is just really, really exciting technology, and we expect to see this adopted en masse in the coming years. So again, this isn't our idea. This is already happening. Indeed, a lot of Australian universities have already adopted this type of technology, either if not university-wide, they're within pilots within particular faculties, and it's very prevalent within MOOCs and specialist micro-credential providers. So we expect to see this type of format, this badge format, quickly take over, the certificate and the big degree. Richard, I'll hand over to you to talk about this one.
Thanks very much, Jeff. I hope everyone's following this so far. It's probably a good point to kind of pause and just remind you that this is our latest thinking about what's happening here, and we wanted to use this opportunity to kind of not wait until we have something perfectly refined and thought through, but rather use this conference as it's intended to share, what's on our mind at the moment and what we've been working on really, really recently, not what's the finished product. So with that in mind, and following on from what Jeff has said, he's right. Universities in Australia are already doing this. They are looking at micro-credentials, and they're looking at ways to make them digitally verifiable. And indeed, this year, there was a huge uptake by Australian universities in the government's 6-month micro-credential initiative. And that's meant a great deal of opportunity for students this year when other opportunities have dried up. And I think it kind of reflects on the fact that if this change is happening away from longer degrees towards shorter, more industry relevant degrees, then if any national education system can do it, the Australian one is very well placed to do that. For example, in the Philippines, they haven't been able to get their universities to adapt as quickly. And so instead, the government has partnered with a MOOC called Coursera to give all of the citizens of the Philippines access to learning opportunities there. So it's another way of doing it. To talk about what we've got on this slide here, we've put a bit of thought into, okay, if this change happens, where does it happen first? And we think that the sectors that have high regulation and a slower pace of change are likely to remain using longer degrees as the predominant career pathway, the prominent training pathway. And so, in a very simplistic matter, sectors like healthcare and education, you probably don't want your doctor to have got a degree online in 1 month. We need a whole lot of regulations there to ensure quality. Same with education. And so those sectors are likely to remain in the traditional format. But in areas like tech, as we've spoken about a couple of times already, the change happens so fast, and the demand from employers for the most up-to-date skills is so rapid that it's actually really, really difficult, if not impossible, to do that through a traditional 5-year degree. And so we're seeing new education providers enter the market, offering different ways of doing this. And indeed, universities are innovating as well and changing the way they offer computer science degrees. Now, what's left in the middle are other sectors like engineering and business, and it's unclear which way those will go. But we think this is an interesting way of laying out how the landscape changes. And if you go on to the next slide, Jeff, we can talk about what this means. So if you're kind of following us so far and you agree with some of what we're saying, then the future for a grad, what a grad looks like tomorrow, is kind of different to what it is today. Instead of having a single degree and perhaps some extracurricular activities that they'll present to their employer, what they'll present instead is a portfolio of learning experiences and other qualifications that demonstrate their fit for that particular role. And again, we see this today already. The best students are beginning to supplement their CVs with courses they've taken online. If they've studied commerce, but they want to prove they can be a really skilled analyst, they might have taken a Python course online, and they can add that as a bonus to an employer. I know that when we recruit and we see that someone's done some extra training in Python, it's something that we consider highly. And so if that trend continues, then we'll see this proliferation, I suppose, of the qualifications that you offer to an employer. And in doing that, it makes things a little complicated. It's quite easy at the moment. I'm preempting a slide that's coming later on, but it's quite easy at the moment to come with a single degree and say, yep, I've taken a commerce degree. You have a good idea about my skills. It's harder to have a basket of qualifications and say, hey, this is everything I've done. Is this a good fit for the kind of roles you're hiring on? And so we'll touch on that in a moment. But this is, again, a bit of a view of where we're going or where the world might go. And indeed, again, Jeff, if you jump to the next slide, this is already happening. 2020 has been a year of many, many firsts. And in this year alone, we've seen the major tech employers, especially in the US, announce their own training programs. So to pick up on a few examples, a major one that made headlines a couple of months ago was Google formally stating that actually to get a job with us, we no longer need a 3 or 4 year college degree. In fact, this 6-month course that I think they're running through Coursera is enough for consideration in an interview, and the prospect of a job there. And since then, Amazon, Apple, and others have come out and made similar statements. Some of these employers are taking the training in-house themselves. Others are just saying, you know, we endorse these other non-traditional training providers. So again, that kind of fits into the slide we were talking about earlier, saying that this change will happen first in the tech industry, and then it will filter into other industries as well. I'll pass back to you, Jeff. And I also note that we are getting close to time, so we might need to speed up and stop telling so many stories.
Awesome. I'll power through it. So as Rich alluded to, for all the challenges of, let's call it today's big degree approach, one of the benefits is it's simple and it's clear cut from, you know, it's a clear cut signal for employers and students. If we move into this future approach where you've got portfolios of qualifications, it very quickly gets really has a potential to get really messy. And it's very difficult for a student to know what types of qualifications they should be focusing on. And indeed, you know, if the market does become fragmented and you see an influx of smaller providers, there will be a real mix of, you know, the quality of education provided. There's no doubt about that. And so it has the potential to get really messy. And so what we're anticipating is we need some kind of clear mapping to allow a student to know exactly what is and isn't a relevant qualification for any particular degree. And, you know, they can look at a job and in a moment's notice know, based on the qualifications that are currently either completed or in progress in their portfolio, they know straight away whether they're either qualified or on the pathway to be qualified for that particular qualification. And so just to quickly skip back a slide, what's going to be required of employers for this vision to come to fruition is for them to help really clearly articulate the types of skills and qualifications that are specifically relevant to that role. And I'll try and illustrate that using a practical example. If we're hiring for let's say a junior tech sales representative. And so, you know, this is one we can speak to firsthand at Prosple. Historically, like a lot of employers in our recruiting, we may have said, you know, we're recruiting people who have a degree, and we don't really mind too much which degree, but that was our primary talent signal. You know, built into that somewhere were the skills we're actually looking for, like communication, problem solving, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're saying is that, and this may not happen straight away, but we can see this being replaced over time with a stack of credentials that actually, in their entirety, add up to be a much better indicator of the suitability of a candidate for this particular role. And so in this example here, obviously they're going to need sales skills. And I've got an example here that we were looking at the other day. It's not because we necessarily endorse it, but you know, there's a provider in the US called SV Academy, which all they do is tech sales. So they live and breathe it, they specialize it. And to the extent that's evolving, you know, it's a necessity of their business model that they stay at the cutting edge. And, you know, their proposition is based on the deliverables and the results and the numbers. They're not able to rely on, you know, a big brand, a storied history, a fancy campus. It's just we produce tech sales graduates who are ready to hit the road running. And so that's an 8-week program. So it may be, we're not saying that we'd have to completely move away from the big degree straight away. It might be that we take it in small steps. We might say, to begin with, here's 2 alternative pathways. You can either come into this with a degree, or you can do this SV Sales Academy tech sales training. As an example, 2 options. And just to build on this, we might find over time that the people coming through the latter micro-credential approach through SV Academy are really good salespeople, but let's say hypothetically, they're lacking some technical literacy. And so we add to that pathway a Google Cloud computing course, which is offered by Google. It's an example of the type of credential that Richard mentioned before. And let's say that's 1 week. Maybe over time we realize the SV Academy, the customer service isn't quite up to scratch. And so IBM has a fantastic, and these are real examples, by the way. IBM right now has a customer engagement professional certificate on Coursera, open to anyone for free, that can be done in 20 hours. And again, this is completely hypothetical. We may find that plugs the gap in terms of customer service. And then to the extent there's still gaps, it might be that we say, well, we really like good problem solvers. We haven't yet found a micro-credential that really hits the nail on the head. And so we've got our own problem-solving talent trial, which we've developed, and we deliver that in the form of a talent trial through the Prosple network. And so this transition might take, multiple years, but it's very, it's quite plausible for us to get to a point where we say, well, you know what, this stack of credentials here is actually, we find, a much, much better indicator of the suitability of a candidate than a commerce degree. That's not a big leap to make. And so again, we're not saying that employers at any point are going to drop degrees entirely and next week move over to micro-credentials. It will take time. It will be done in baby steps. There will be interim steps where there's alternatives and different pathways and evolution, but we expect this to happen in the future, and we want to play a role in that at Prosple and in supporting that, helping employers do that effectively, and helping students make good career and education decisions. So I'll pass over to you for this point, Rich. We've got 15 minutes left, I think.
Ben, can I clarify? I actually think we should be stopping now or soon and going to questions, or do we have another 15 minutes?
The questions are flying in.
Okay. If you can grant us another 2 minutes, we'll wrap up and then go to perfect. So the implication of everything Jeff just said is actually quite attractive for educators. If there are universities in the room, if you have employers nominating which degrees and which micro-credentials are the most important for them in attracting their future graduates, then universities can use that vote of confidence to attract students to degrees. And instead of saying, these are the types of career paths you could get by studying this degree or this micro-credential with us, you can actually say, no, these are real jobs right now that require this degree, or are saying that this is one of the pathways into a job with us. And that's a really, really exciting proposition. And what it means is that you get the best degrees and the best offerings coming to the top, because future students that are looking at degrees, looking at study options, are seeing the ones that are being voted by employers as being meaningful as being part of their pathway, and are therefore picking those ones, at least those that are that are studying for the purpose of finding a job. So that it kind of closes the loop here and is really neat. And then the final point we'll make on the final slide, and I'll take this opportunity now to say that the code word today is opportunity, because that's what this is all about. But the point of this slide here is that learning and training and education doesn't stop at the point that you're hired. Everyone in the room knows that. You know how much effort, how much you invest, how much time you pour into recruiting the right person for your organization. And so to make sure you realize the full potential of that investment, the best organizations continue to invest in their individuals to make sure that they go on to become leaders within the company. And this philosophy, what we've been talking about, it actually applies. You can use it before the point of hiring to signal the kind of talent that you're looking to hire, and it continues on after they join your organization. We've started doing this recently at Prosple, where we've said to everyone in our team, we will give you all an individual budget to go out and look for learning opportunities that help you progress along the development path that you want to go. And so to talk about one of the qualifications that Jeff alluded to a couple of slides ago, the IBM customer service course, that's a course that many of the people in our customer success team are picking up, because rather than listening to Jeff or I, who have never worked a customer service job in our life, try and train our team on how to do that, it's better that they go to the best source. And this is another really exciting opportunity, I think, for universities to continue to engage in the learning process beyond an undergraduate degree or a postgraduate degree, but to build meaningful partnerships with employers to continue helping them to train and grow their staff over time. And there's been some good examples of these partnerships happening this year, and we expect that to continue in the future. So that's kind of it on what we're going to share today. Again, it's our view. It's a collection of recent thoughts that we've had. So if you agree with it, great. If you're not quite there, that's fine as well. We're looking forward to some good questions. And if you already knew all of this, then we're sorry for wasting your time. But really, really appreciate everyone dropping into our presentation and looking forward to taking some questions.
Right, I've got 8 or 9 questions. So if we try and get through all of them, quick answers, gentlemen-ish. Yeah, if that's all right. So first one, right, the issue is with senior leadership across all the employers. The senior leadership say you got to recruit from these degrees at these universities, this particular school. You can imagine all that kind of stuff. Everyone's listening and nodding, aren't they? So how do we educate the leadership about particular minorities may not have access to education at university? University, as you say, university degrees may not be the solution anymore. Any thoughts on that kind of stuff?
Really good question. I think I've got a couple of ideas, but I definitely acknowledge the fact that in many organizations, you will find the senior leaders saying that the best pathway into a job is the path that they took. Yes. Jeff and I had this at the company we used to work for, and it particularly came up on the topic of an MBA. If the senior leader had done an MBA, they would say, hand over heart, you must do this if you want to succeed. If they hadn't done an MBA, you'd say, it's not necessary. I succeeded, and therefore you don't need to as well. So I don't really know the answer. I think it's a hard conversation, but if what we've said today works, then the proof will be in the pudding. You can point to the best talent rising up through the ranks and say, hey, did you know they never took a degree? In fact, one of our best developers never studied a formal degree, and that's been pointed out to us many times.
Okay, next question. In the future, do you think we might drop the label graduate from the graduate recruitment graduate program in favour of something else, something more inclusive? Might be junior talent, early careers, something like that. Do you think that's the direction we're heading in?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think there will be, like I said, a messy period before new norms are established, where there's different language and different terms, and but the language will absolutely evolve. It's probably hard to say exactly what the new norms will be, but at some point those new norms will be established, and with that, different language conventions.
There's a gap in the market for someone here to come up with a name for the new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What about developing softer skills? So part of the experience of university is the social aspect. So if you spend 3, 4, 5 years at uni, whatever, there's parties, drinkings, clubs, societies, etc., etc. So what happens in a micro-credential world where maybe you don't have access to that kind of stuff or those types of opportunities?
Really good question. We've spent a bit of time thinking about this as well, because it's spot on. It's so important. I think they say in the US, going to college is actually the process of becoming an adult. It's learning to live out of home. It's learning to budget. It's learning to interact with people. And that is a really, really important part. So we've got some ideas. We think there's an opportunity here for providers, perhaps colleges, to continue to provide accommodation in a place where students can come, get extra tuition, and learn with a cohort of like-minded students. I hope that volunteering increases and that organisations that can provide really interesting experiences, perhaps overseas or in remote and rural areas where students can get these kind of life-building experiences through other ways, will increase in prominence. I don't know, Jeff, if you've got any other ideas about what fills that void.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like it's plausible that an employer on their credentials pathway might have a step that, you know, has a bucket of eligible life experiences, whether that be a gap year, volunteering, you know, whatever you see correlates well with that type of life experience that you're looking for. And that doesn't need to be tied up in a traditional degree. There's many other ways to do that can be, you know, if the end game is that sort of soft skills development, there's arguably much better ways to do that and demonstrate that than, you know, drinking at the uni bar.
Yeah. Okay. What else? What about the impact of micro-credentials on careers where you need a qualification? So law or accounting or engineering, you need to have a degree first, and then you join the employer and maybe you do further study in order to get some more letters after your name. How does that continue in an environment where maybe you're saying that the degree, which traditionally has been the first thing you need, you might not get the degree in the first place? Does that mean the professional qualification structure changes?
Again, really good question. And we don't know the answer in terms of when this will happen. What we do know is we're just seeing this trend in tech. And I suppose that's been different because it hasn't required at least a regulated degree in most cases. So when you get closer to accounting, I'm not sure. We're already seeing a bit of a separation between bookkeepers and accountants. So perhaps that continues. Law is an interesting example. We heard recently that in the UK, many law firms are now, as of next year, will begin recruiting grads that don't have law degrees. Now, in that case, they will still train them up to the point where they can pass the bar equivalent in the UK through the employer. But I think it'll be up to each industry to decide what level of regulation needs to stay, and as well as Tesco to define what that means in terms of the credentials. We're just observing this happening first in tech and business, and the more regulated degrees will follow.
Okay, cool. Right. I think we might stop there because we're getting close to time. Jeff and Richard, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your sponsorship and your support of the AAGE over the years. Very interesting session. And obviously people can come and talk to the Prosple team in the Virtual Careers Expo.
Thanks, Ben.
So
Thanks,
I'll
guys.
just wrap up a couple of